Smith. What makes a person praiseworthy? For most of us, that's a harder question than it seems at first. In Project 2, Speaking in Praise, from the Advanced Communication Series Manual Special Occasion Speeches, Lloyd Smith attempts to answer it by talking about the life of a friend. Lloyd Smith and Just Tom.
Almost exactly 1 month ago, October 28th, those of you who subscribe to the paper might have seen this front page. The headline story says, Father Tom's Last Blessing, $1 million in donations. Father Tom was Father Tom Kuykendall, a retired parish priest from St. Joseph's Church. Those of you who are Catholic here undoubtedly knew who he was. He spent about 17 years as a parish priest at St. Joseph's, and by all accounts, he was a very praiseworthy person in that position. I can't tell you that because I'm not Catholic and did not attend that church. However, I'm in an unusual position here because I knew Father Tom when he was just Tom. And so that's the guy I would like to tell you about. Tom Kuykendall was an interesting and complicated man. He was the debate coach at Eisenhower High School during the years when I was the debate coach at Eastman. That's how I got to know him. I knew him for about 30 years before he became a priest. You may not know that most priests begin their seminary studies when they're very young, but the Catholic Church has a program that it was created specifically for people who retired, men who retired. And when Tom retired from teaching at Eisenhower, he moved back to Wisconsin and joined and entered the seminary there for retired guys and became a Catholic priest at about age 55 or so. Pretty unusual thing to have done. When he was teaching and coaching debate, I spent probably hundreds of hours with him. Debate coaching is a little bit weird because the coaches are also the officials, and there are no other officials. So somebody has to run the tournaments, and Tom and I did that here in Central Washington. The reason for that was both of us knew what we were doing, but more than that, we also were willing and able to sit in a little room and do the tournament matching. Debate tournaments work according to a system called power protection, and it involves a lot of shuffling around, keeping track of how people have done during the various rounds and whatnot. It's tedious work, not really very much fun, but you get all of the complaining that you can have as your reward. Tom and I were good at doing the job. We didn't screw up. We didn't try to get advantages for our own teams, and we were really good at telling people to buzz off when they were complaining about what we were doing. And that's the interesting thing about Tom. He was, if your stereotype of a priest is kind of this gentle guy who, you know, the shepherd with his flock, that wasn't what just Tom was like at all. Tom was really good at explaining to people if they made him angry. I recall once, for example, when one of his students decided to borrow the Eisenhower van to go off and get something to eat. Tom was not a happy man about that. That kid never again appeared at a debate tournament. Tom just bounced him out. And he didn't quite follow the procedures of the school, but nobody was willing to confront him about it. He also had a very colorful way of speaking. I recall once at a tournament down at Whitman College in Walla Walla. That tournament was typically in late January. We were down there and walking back to the headquarters room from around, and just as I got to the door, it started hailing. Well, I hurried up and got inside and turned around to look, and there was Tom coming down the sidewalk. And about 20 feet from the door, the hail turned from regular size hail to about marble size hail, and just hammered down on his bald head. And when he stepped in the door, he had some very unpriestly things to say about the weather. And he bent over and said, you know, is my head okay? Is my head okay? And I looked at it and said, oh yeah, it looks great. What it looked like was that somebody had hammered on him. And sure enough, the next day, he was a massive bruise all over his bald head. I thought it was kind of funny, but he somehow didn't do that. When Tom was a teacher, I mean, a true teacher, was a scholar. He taught Latin, was very fluent in it, taught English, he was excellent at that, pioneered advanced placement and so on. And when he retired, as I said before, he became a priest. Now the question that comes up about this headline is, how would a guy who taught school and then became a priest end up with $1 million to give to anybody? And that's a pretty good question. The answer is that Tom had a teacher's pension, and so he was in a position to give his entire priest salary back to the church, which he did, because he could live on his pension. The priest lifestyle does not involve a lot of glamour and travel and new cars and whatnot, so he didn't have to worry about that. He also, the entire time he taught, lived very frugally. He lived in the house his parents had lived in down in Yakima, not too far from Eisenhower High School. Always drove used cars. He didn't really have an eye for cars, so he had about a 10-year-old Buick most of the time. And he just saved money and invested it. And then he slowly gave it back to the church. Those of you who are parishioners of St. Joseph's, and if you've been there for very long, know that the old St. Joseph's Church, which is now the Wenatchee Community Center, it's where, what street is that? Chelan Street curves down to become one with Mission Street again. That building was very old. It's close to 100 years old, was wearing out, becoming unsuitable. And the church had talked about building a new church for decades. And when Tom showed up as the parish priest, he said, enough talk. You know, we've either got to do it or we've got to shut up. Those are really the only two choices. We can't just talk and talk and talk and talk. And they did it. Well, most of the $1 million that he donated went to the building fund. He just slowly withdrew his money from his retirement funds because he knew he wasn't going to need those. The rest of it came from just his priest salary and very careful investments. Now, what's the lesson you can learn from the life of a guy like that? The first lesson is that if Tom were standing here hearing me say that his life should serve as a lesson for someone, he would look down his nose at me. He's quite a bit taller than I was. He would look down his nose at me and snort derisively and say, really, you have to be joking, because he didn't believe his life was a lesson for anyone. The lesson, though, was that you should live as well as you can, not as well as you can, live as good a life as you can, and try to leave the world a little better than what you found it. And I think my friend Tom did exactly that. And when he died last May, that was a very sad day, I thought. And